This episode of Why We Bleep is sponsored by Signal Sounds. Yes, friends, you know what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful shop and it's in a beautiful place called Glasgow, filled with cuddly people and interesting equipment. Yes, they stock the good stuff. Things from companies such as After Later. They've got Erica Synth, Zendelay, that's the Ninja Tunes collaboration module desktop delay mad thing. They've got all the unpronounceable things from noise engineering. They've got the Future Sound Systems pin matrix thingamaflip, the MTX-A and MTX-G. Yes, that's like a guitar pedal interface that uses a matrix. I need that in my life. And perhaps the thing that I want the most is that Michigan Synthworks SY 0.5. That is the Syncussion Eurorack module. They have that. They have that in stock. I want that. Interesting things to make electronic music with. Signal Sounds have them. So go to the website signalsounds.com. That is signalsounds.com. Why? Goodness gracious, gravy and whiskers. I hope this finds you an incredibly well person. Welcome if you've never listened to Why We Bleep. This is a podcast about talking to electronic musicians and also the people who make the equipment and software that electronic musicians use. It's sort of an interview thing. We chat about why we bleep. And actually, interestingly, this chat with the downright gosh dang wonderful BT is very much about why we bleep. In fact, BT sort of more directly addresses that question and brings up an insanely important point around it, which I won't spoil. I'll let you listen to it. But my goodness, BT is a wonderful man. And I'm sure if you sort of know a bit about him and you've seen him interviewed, you're kind of aware of that. I guess you would say that BT is a kind of legend of what is sort of known as the EDM kind of movement, but that is selling his skills incredibly short. The man is insanely talented and he has a 30-year career, has done 13 plus albums, worked on soundtracks for films such as Go, The Fast and the Furious, Monster, Gone in 60 Seconds, and has also worked with people such as David Bowie, no biggie. But in addition to this, BT is also a kind of software creator. He has been, working with Isotope, who make the wonderful RX, which I use extensively, but they obviously make lots of creative tools as well. Stutter Edit is the name of the piece of software that BT sort of pioneered. Oh, and the other thing that he did in 2014, he was hired by Disney to create music for Tomorrowland. He created 4 hours of music for Tomorrowland in Disneyland, which is just, what a brief, what a incredible job to have worked on. BT has by far given the most important answer to the sort of last question that I ask in this podcast, which is, what is the future of music technology? And time will prove that it is the most important answer to that question, and is a subject that has never been discussed on this podcast, but is being discussed by people like Holly Herndon. It's important, and that is to do with artificial intelligence. But in this conversation, I was really fired up by a video on Facebook, which I will link to. And if you can, and if you have the time, go and watch this little studio tour. It's like 20-minute studio tour where BT just walks you around his studio. That video is just a great example of how nice he is as he just chats very humbly about his stuff, but also just how good his taste is in music equipment. Like, he has everything you could possibly want. And he uses it daily. And this is the thing that kind of blew my mind. And that's what I really wanted to needle him on a little bit, was how do you manage having so much gear and being so prolific as you are? So there is a lot of very practical stuff in this in terms of how to arrange equipment and how to approach it. And I don't think that you can listen to this and not sort of start looking around at the gear around you and thinking about different ways to kind of rig stuff up and taking some inspiration from it. Because I sure as heck have. I think a good yardstick to these conversations is whether we bring up manual Gotchings, E2, E4, and BT is the second guest to have brought that up. So my cap is thoroughly doffed to you, sir. But before we speak to BT, we have just one short sponsored message from a service that can teach you some amazing new skills. Why We Bleep is also sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is a beautiful hub of video-based learning. It offers thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people like you. These classes cover an absolutely multitudinous array of topics. If there's something that you have been thinking about learning more about or teaching yourself, very likely there is a class on that subject on Skillshare. Case in point, yours truly here has been filming little clips of Franco, my son, that's my beautiful boy, throughout the first year of his life. He is about to have his first birthday, and I am going to make a video kind of compiling all of those moments together. And there is actually a Skillshare class like this. It's called Filmmaking from Home, How to Turn Found Footage into a Compelling Video, taught by Penny Lane. No relation, I think, to the Beatles track. And is a good example of the fact that there's basically a Skillshare class for pretty much anything that you can conceive of. And I have a sweet opening deal for you if you want to try this thing for free. By clicking the link in the description for a limited time, the first 1,000 people will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership so you can explore your creativity and learn yourself some new skills. And with that, let's chat. Who's he? It's BT. Thanks.
I've been at home and been able to be in the studio, and I've been more productive in the last 4 or 5 months than I've been in the last 10 years. So I've gotten so many massive ticket projects checked off that would have taken a couple years more, quite literally. I mean, we're in development on 11 pieces of software right now, and I'm obviously really mindful and compassionate about my peers and my friends and just kind of the world at large that's struggling. And I feel really blessed that we've had the time to devote to all this creative stuff. Has been a pretty remarkable gift, honestly.
It is funny to hear you say that, the way we're like, I've actually got some stuff done, because I'm like looking at your discography and your sort of your CV basically, and all I see is sheer productivity in terms of like you've just been cranking out albums. Like there's a sort of level of pace that I think a lot of electronic musicians are simply not so prolific. And I suppose the question is like energy levels. How do you maintain it, and what does like a typical day look like? What do you do all day?
Yeah, that's great. And there's a lot to unpack there, because it's by volition. It's very, very deliberate. So just kind of to roll back into a little bit of the sort of macro and kind of my story. I studied music as a kid, and very seriously too. I went to conservatory starting when I was 7, and I studied with an amazing teacher named Satiris Vlahopoulos, and he was playing me, Bartok and Stravinsky when other kids my age were listening to or learning, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, these guys, maybe Chopin if their teacher was a little loopy, right? So I had this very kind of progressive teacher who really, his name's Satiris Vlahopoulos. He's still alive. He's in his 90s, a remarkable man, an incredible composer, and opened my eyes to a lot of what's possible insofar as classical music. And so as a teenager, I fell in love with English music and culture, and in particular with early new wave music. And I was mowing lawns to to buy my first synthesizers, paper routes, shoveling driveways. I don't know if you guys have that, but it's like a big thing. I would mow lawns in the summertime and then, deliver papers kind of into the fall and then shovel driveways in the wintertime and kind of looped like that. And I was able to buy my first synthesizers, samplers, and drum machines. These things kind of seem like parallel thought threads, synthesis and new wave and eventually breakdancing music, breakdancing culture and classical music. But they were kind of my two loves as a kid. And the third was, and really it's by introduction through, I think, kind of tinkering, so sort of electronic project kits and stuff are computers. And so I started building computers as a really young kid. I did that with my dad. My dad is a brilliant guy. He's a PhD in engineering, and he and I would work on computers together. We built a IBM 5150, and that was my first sequencer. I got Voyetra Sequencer Plus Gold for that, and I went to Berklee School of Music when I was 15. So I was a really young kid going there, and so just to kind of put a bow on this, the kind of macro pictures, I was a very nerdy, introspective, bright, but maybe not in, the best way socially sort of kid. And so I didn't have a lot of friends. I was just interested in music and computers and synthesizers. And I went to university, you guys would say, really, really early. And so I've been working really hard and studying really hard basically my whole life. And so it's interesting because and then it's another sort of long story, but, moved to Los Angeles after Berklee and then trying to get a record deal, couldn't get a record deal, moved back home, lived with my family for about 2 years and started Deep Dish Records with two of my closest friends. And we all sold our clunker cars. I had a old Buick that I had inherited from my dad and sold it. And Ali sold his car and Sharam sold his car. We pulled our money and we started a record label. And the first record that I made got in the hands of Sasha, and then Sasha invited me to come over to England. I got my record deal on that trip. But what you asked me was a really great question about output, and I wanted to tell a little bit of kind of the backstory. I kind of forfeited a normal childhood for the pursuit of music. Yeah. And so I've had ingrained a kind of unique work ethic from the beginning. But again,
that was self-directed, was it? I mean, you weren't being pushed to kind of make music by your parents, or were you?
No, it's a great question. In fact, quite the opposite. It was terrifying for my folks. Yeah. My folks are kind of first generation academics. We come from both my parents have their doctorates, and they come from families of farmers. And I guess the most sort of illustrious thing that someone in my family had done is my grandfather on my mom's side worked for DuPont, and which was a big deal. But no one in our family was very educated, and so my parents were terrified that my love and sort of fixation on music, because their hope is that I was going to go to an Ivy League school and be able to get a scholarship. My parents couldn't afford to send me a place like that, and that become a doctor or a lawyer. And they were completely horrified how obsessed I was with music from an early age. But I was very serious about it, and so they kind of at a point acquiesced and allowed it to happen. It wasn't until much later that both of them really sort of, and of course they loved me and they were supportive, but they were really scared, and understandably. And now, of course, they're proud and they understand it, but it was a scary thing for them.
Kind of, yeah, you've turned out well in that regard. Like it's that gamble of, he's going to become a musician. Is he going to make no money at all? He's okay. He's okay. What about, particularly with synths though? Why? Because especially if you were kind of classically trained, mm-hmm. Can you talk a bit about why you were drawn to synths? Like why would you mow a lawn for all summer for a synth particularly, not for a violin or for a new piano or more lessons, or do you know what I mean? It's like, why a synth?
So, and a lot of this again comes back to that teacher that I mentioned, Satiris Vlahopoulos, my composition and he taught me counterpoint, music theory, orchestration, all these kind of things at a very young age. So he was playing me such wild music, radical music. And I identified at a very early age, if these people were alive and writing music now, that this is what they would be drawn to. Because, I mean, for example, somebody like, you use someone like Wagner, for example, was experimenting so much with orchestral color. He would have the brass section out in the hall to play on a piece because he was looking for a new timbre or sort of spectral characteristic of the orchestra, a color that didn't exist. And so when I started hearing bands like Depeche Mode and New Order and Cabaret Voltaire and the Human League and and all of this incredible music that was coming out of England in the early 80s, Howard Jones, and these sounds were absolutely captivating to me. And I thought, if this group of composers that I love and I've been studying since I was a child was alive now, this is what they would be using to make music without question. It's actually unquestionable. They would, without question, be using these tools to make music were they to be alive now. So that's how I was drawn to it.
So you have this beautiful studio, which is filled with every synthesizer that anyone could ever want, drum machines and effects as well. And I guess, like, with regard to like the studio as an instrument, how do you keep a studio where you have every option at your fingertips? How do you make it usable? How do you make sure that if you're going to have every synth at your fingertips, that you can still write quickly and stay inspired and not get overwhelmed?
So part of it goes back to something that you asked before that I didn't fully answer, which is my answer would be talking about time management. And so I live a very sort of disciplined life. Like, part of my productivity is down to the way I eat, the way I my physical fitness routine, my sleep routine. I have a morning routine with meditation. And so many of those things absolutely amplify my creative life in a way that is kind of unspeakable, because I've gone for periods where I haven't done those things. And so I can see this kind of cascading downward negative effect to my creative output. So time management and everything that happens outside of the studio. So basically the other kind of 70 to 80% of life is really, really disciplined, for lack of a better descriptor. So it's the same, and I bring that up because the same applies to the way that my studio is designed and how I use it. So for a start, the studio is segmented into three, actually four, and I'll speak about the fourth in a second, but three very specific sections, which is mix position. And mix position includes most of the left-hand wall, which is where a lot of the synthesizers live. And it also includes the ring immediately around me, which has a Prophet 5, a Jupiter 8, an OBX-A, the GDS, the Fairlight, two mini Moogs, OBX-A, SH09, OB6, an Oscar, but my Oscar is in repair right now. It's one of my favorite synths. I miss it a lot. And so kind of my main sort of writing cohorts, right, all live right there around me. And that is the most important area of the studio, is that inner ring and the synth wall. That's area one. Okay. Area two is the modular and drum machine area. That's connected to its own bespoke computer. It's an old G5 cheese grater, they call them. And that's hooked to a Midas Venice F32. And I use that basically as a tape deck. So quite literally, I'm not using any DAW functions in there. I'm using it for sync, a little bit of effects, and my modular and all the drum machines and everything that lives on the right-hand side of the room is its own station. So it doesn't even speak to mix position at all. There's no tie lines to get audio there. I quite literally have to print things. And I'm kind of giving away what the punchline is going to be to this by saying this, but it's completely disconnected from the rest of the room. It's an activity. So I go over on that side of the room. I power up the modular, the old modular stuff, the ARP 2600, two vintage SEMs, a Roland System 100A. my step sequencers, Eurorack stuff, and I write there. And so that's an activity. I write there, or I record drum machine parts over there. I print them to what I would consider tape. It's actually the disc. And then I take those renders and I pull them to mix position. So the third area is, there aren't four, there's three actually. So the third area is the area in the back left corner of the room. And basically that's kind of my 90s area. And I set that up identical to the setup that I had when I made Movement in Still Life and EMA and ESCM. I bundled those two rigs together in a very small corner. So I have the Juno 106.
I love that you've done this, by the way. I think
it
that
had
is
to be
absolutely
done.
like recreate your 1997 rig within your room, like self-contained is.
Yeah,
that is brilliant.
It's crazy too, because I did it from photos. So I even put the gear at the same height and in the same order, like, wow, an O3RW on top of the K2500, on top of the SideQuest 270 meg, kind of cartridge thing to hold sounds for the K2500. So it's quite literally identical to the rig that I had when I made EMA, which is in my bedroom at my parents' house. And then right to the right of it is this OS9 Pro Tools 24-bit rig that I made Movement in Still Life on. And so those two areas are interfaced together. So, and the sequencer for that area is that IBM 5150 that my dad and I built together. And I've retrofitted it. It's got a CF card reader in it now. Its boot disk is an SSD, which is ridiculous for a computer made in, I guess, 82 or something. But so the point to all of this is each area in the room is an activity. And so I never have it all on at once. And I'm never distracted by having that amount of stuff, because in each area is like I'm doing something purposeful. I'm not kind of like, so for example, with the modular, I'm scoring a video game right now, and I'm about a year and a half into it. And it's a 3-year project. It's coming out in 2022. And I had a half-hour music due, and I wanted to do a lot of interesting kind of isorhythmic, tangerine dreamy type stuff. So I would never sit in mixed position and do that. It's so fun. You like stand up, put patch cables around your neck, and in 3 hours, I can make piece after piece after piece in the modular area, print them, send them, and get feedback on them, do some tweaks, print them again while I still have patches up. And then that's kind of what it is. So the final thing I'm going to say about this, that I hope, to people that listen to this, it will be helpful, is the reason I'm able to make so much music, and the time management stuff, the way the studio is organized are both incredibly important. Really comes down to one thing, is my auto loads. So I have such incredible auto loads for all of these setups that it's quite literally a couple power switches and everything is at unity volume. Everything has MIDI assigned to it. Everything has a bespoke compressor, EQ starting place on it. All my effect sends are all set up. So I literally, in a couple clicks of power switches and then launching an auto load for whatever that task is, I'm ready to write and record. So it cuts all the fat out of the process of like setting thing up each time I go to do it. So if I'm going to make a piece of synth focused music using my inner ring, I have an auto load for that. If I don't want to use that left wall of synths, if I only need things in the inner ring, I have an auto load for that too. If I'm going to do cinematic composing, I power up basically what's my synclavier, which is this PC Audio Labs kind of supercomputer with like half a terabyte of RAM. It's this ridiculous machine. Power that up, audio over IP, Cubase auto load, 3,000 contact instruments, ready to write. And literally, I click one button and I can render out 32-bit stereo stems out of this orchestral auto load that is thousands and thousands of contact instruments. So that's like kind of another auto load. So it's all down to these auto loads that I'm able to be so hyper productive. It's so funny because so many people that are fans are music creators themselves, and so for so long people have been like, man, how are you making this much music at this kind of quality and want to know production stuff. And so finally, we've been working on it. Actually, we're doing a masterclass just for this reason, to kind of show some of these things, because I really think that they're going to get a lot of people tremendously unstuck. Because I think creative people are wired to be creative, right? And not wired for all this technical stuff. Now, the interesting thing is, it's kind of top of mind because I did a module about this last week, is people say, well, what do you do when you have writer's block? You must not get writer's block. I'm like, dude, I get writer's block all the time. Like, I feel creative when I have creative time blocked out, probably 20% of my creative time. And people are like, well, so what do you do? Like, sit and stare? And I'm like, no, you organize your sound libraries, you work on your auto loads, you make patches. There's 100,000 things to do that are gifts for your future self. Right. So when you do feel creative, you sit down, you hit 3 power switches, and you're like, I'm ready to rock. So it's that kind of balance of time between these sort of perfunctory like things that us creative types don't like to do, which you can do when you don't feel that creative, that is a gift for your future creative self. So,
that's wonderful. My question also is about the Eurorack stuff. I saw in the video, but it would be great if you could talk a bit about particularly how you integrate Eurorack without disappearing into it. Do you know what I mean? Although it seems that you kind of do disappear into it. And I like that as well, because I recognize why that's valuable. It's like Eurorack is a time sink, and you've kind of almost said it's a time sink, therefore I'm going to have my own area for it. But can you talk a bit about, you do integrate the clocks though, and with what though? How does that all work?
So I use in that area MSQ. I think it's an MSQ 80. I'd have to Google this. I'll Google it while I'm telling you it. So it's a very old sync box. It's an old Roland sync box. I found it, SBX 80. That's what it is, a Roland SBX 80. There's a lot of things that are great about it. But my favorite thing is it's got a freaking tempo knob on it. So I actually slave that cheese grater to the SBX 80, which is crazy because when I write something in the modular area, it's always fractional tempos. Like if you look at the tempos of songs that I write in the area, it'll be 114.23. And you're like, how did that happen? Oh yeah, I did that. That started in the modular area. So, but it's so fun because if you think about it, when you're in a DAW, it's part of why I love that area. It's part of the design of that area. There's a knob. And you turn the knob and you're listening to the tempo of the music change. You're like, oh, that's nice right there. And you could have been working 15 BPMs away from that. But when you're in a DAW, you're thinking, okay, 110. Oh, yeah. All right. That's synth wave. Okay. 176. Okay. Yeah. That's drum and bass. Okay. 128. Oh, yeah. That's, house music. Okay. 124. Oh, that's deep. You're not thinking like that. You're just like, turn the tempo knob and you're like, oh, wow, this sounds great there. You're not thinking, you're just listening, which is part of what I love about that area. So you bring up something really interesting with Eurorack, and I'm going to just frame it in this kind of pre-frame it in this overarching aesthetic. I don't care how you make a sound, just as long as it's a sound that you love and it suits your composition. So that goes for my friends, for other people that make music, for my own music. My hope is that everyone that is making music just makes sounds they like. It doesn't really matter how you get there or what it was or how you got inspired. And I'll tell an anecdotal story that's kind of funny. So I studied with a professor at Berkeley who's still a mentor of mine. Literally gives, like, I did a thing around Stutter Edit 2, an interview for Berkeley, which is where I went to school. And at the end of it, he interviewed me, and he's like still my mentor. And at the end of it, he was like, his name's Dr. Boulanger. He said, okay, BT, now I want you to go and have a look at the isorhythms on this piece and tell me what you find. And I'm like, okay, I will, but I have a lot of stuff to hand it to a lot of people. So he still teaches me now. He's an amazing, amazing man. Anyway, he and I want, and I think this is good to, have those kind of friendly, creative arguments with people that teach you. And I wouldn't categorize as an argument, but we had a conversation. So he taught me C sound, which is something I use constantly. I use it all the time. I studied it for 10 years. The learning curve to it is horrific. But once you get your head around it, it's just, oh my goodness, it is such an incredible environment, especially for sound design. So he taught me how to use it. And we had this conversation, I'll say one time, where he was like, well, yeah, so, and so-and-so's one of his students, they generated an FT table to make the sine wave. And it was a lot of deliberate hard work. And I was like, here, hey, Dr. B, check this out. And I pull up EXX or EXS 24. And I'm like, "Burp," like that. And he's like, what do you, and I'm like, you don't need to do all that. Like, why would you waste your time in this intellectual exercise of like, okay, so you're smart and you generated a sine wave and a smart wave. I could have written a piece of music in the amount of time that it took to do that. So the kind of story here is, I think that the most important thing is putting yourself in creative environments and workflows that inspire creative thought. And at the end of the day, what matters is what comes out the speakers. It doesn't matter what you made it with. So if that's in the box, if it's a hardware synthesizer, if it's a kazoo, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you meant it, right? And it feels good to listen to, and that other people enjoy it at the end of the day. So with the Eurorack, now speaking directly to the Eurorack, I don't know how to say this nicely, honestly. I am averse to a lot of the music that I hear made in the Eurorack environment. So now, if you talk that, like, we have this thing, East Coast, West Coast thing. So that would be sort of John KG and Xenakis would be kind of the West Coast thing, and the East Coast thing is your like Tangerine Dream. Okay, so like harmonic music like that people can listen to, or like you're being attacked by cicadas, right? It's like those to the kind of polarities of sound, right? Now, what is interesting is about the Eurorack is it's very, very easy to make things, let's call them things, in that environment that are just bizarre, otherworldly, captivating at times, but non-musical, right? And so, and I'll say this too. I think that is the most fun thing about the Eurorack, is because using your hands, in my case, I'm standing, it just kind of unlocks some different sorts of creative thinking. And I'm sure there's some neurological precept going on there. You're making more acetylcholine. It's like my smoke break, right? Like, I don't smoke, so I get up and I use the Eurorack if I'm feeling stumped working on a score cue or whatever. And so I do think it can be a remarkable time sink. I've had friends that have gotten, enmeshed in Eurorack culture that literally can't make music at this point because they're just like collecting VCOs. And I'm like, you guys, you make great music. Literally, what are you doing? So, but the inverse of that is, if you're able to self-discipline, it can be like this incredible environment for just experimenting. And that's what I like. I like using it for two things. I have two sorts of patches I make. One is I'm trying to make music. Another is I'm just going wild and experimenting. I allocate time to do both those things regularly, monthly, to do both of them. And both of them can be fruitful exercises, although I would err on the side of saying that when I sit down to actually structure a piece of music and I'm working with step sequencers, I tune all my oscillators and, am planning to do something, even if it's a little wild, right, in that environment, that it's more melodic. Those are the most fruitful exercises that come out of there. So it's proceed with caution. I will say that with Eurorack.
If you're doing wild experimental stuff with Eurorack, you always end up with like, half an hour, 40 minutes.
Right.
And it's like, how do you keep that manageable? Do you have any like jam editing tips?
Oh, well, yeah, I plenty actually. Yeah, I think one of the most fun things is doing exactly what you said, these long kind of jam sessions in that environment, and then figuring out how to cut them down. So my first tip on that would be, those expert sleeper modules that are in effect an audio interface, like a DC decoupled audio interface. It can send control signals, or you can record into them. That's kind of, in my mind, an essential part of a Eurorack setup. And that guy is lovely too, that makes those things. And it's
Andrew, yeah.
Andrew, that's right. It's one guy. He like writes the software. He does his ads. He does the emails.
Yeah,
he does tech support. He builds the modules. He's like a remarkable guy. Anyway, his stuff is just, in my mind, like I said, an essential part of the Eurorack thing. So my first thought would be never record stereo jams because they're way harder to edit. And I did that for years on my Eurorack setup. And then when I got those Expert Sleeper modules, I was like, holy crap. So I'm going to record individual stems just like I do on everything else. And it's made it so much easier. Like I can take, I'll render out stems. It could be let's say 8 stems. And using your example, it's a half hour long. I take those, I pull them into Logic Audio on my main rig. I get the tempo sorted out, so I'm in range with what this fractional tempo would be that I did in the Eurorack area. And once I get things vaguely lined up to grid, I might flex marker things, and then I'll go through. I like to jump through these long jams as if, how people, kind of everyone these days, the short attention span previews music, right? Like you listen about 15 seconds in and then you jump a minute in. And then if it's even worse, if you're looking at the waveform, you jump to the drop, then you listen to the breakdown and then you're like, I don't know, I couldn't play this one out or whatever, right? It's like that. So I like to do that with these long jams to kind of jump. Okay, wow, this is really interesting, especially when you see a big sort of dominant shift in the waveforms. And I'll just start making markers for sections of interest. And then I'll be really, really brutal about it. I might go get myself coffee, come back to the studio, and I'll go, all right, lock that 7 minutes out. Who cares? Whatever. Just cut it out. And then I jump from minute 3 to minute 14 or whatever it is, right? I said 7 minutes, so to minute 10, okay? And then say I have one kind of cool ostinato part, but the filter jumped really wildly by doing that. I might pull back that ostinato part from the part that I'm cutting into and then crossfade it over a half a minute. So the filter gradually kind of opens. So I'm just really brutal about editing these long jams, but that's typically how I do it is I make markers and then I get out of the studio for a couple minutes, take a head break and go back and just go, well, see you later, 7 minutes. See you later, 11 minutes. Okay, bye. See you then, and I'm really sort of cutthroat about editing this stuff. And that's how I'm able to get them finished.
The head break thing is really interesting. I read an interview with Gold Panda, who's like a British musician, and he said he was making an album and he was using like the MPC and just kind of very simple music, but really like really wonderful. And he talked. He was like, I would be in the studio, I would be making music, and I would be walking the dog. And it was a period where there was no one in the house. My parents were away, and I would just go and walk the dog, make music, walk the dog. And then I sort of recognized that I'd done things like exactly as you say, when I've been really euphoric on a piece of music, I've been so excited, I almost stand up and walk out of the studio. And it's that sort of getting away from it that is what stops you from fatigue. It's the kind of, it's like listening fatigue from it's something that I should consciously remember to do.
Guess what? I've got a little hack for you, okay, which is really cool. Is I don't know if you've heard about this, but the most amount of time you can effectively pay attention without taking a break is 52 minutes. There's study after study done. Yes. And so the optimal break time, this is going to sound crazy, okay, is 17 minutes. And people listening to this, Google it, you'll find the study at Stanford or Harvard or one of these Ivy League schools did this study. And so if you're able to get yourself just a little, like an egg timer, and you basically set it for every hour, and I don't take 15 minutes, but I'll take 5 or 7 and I'll just get up and move around. I might, something I think that's a real sort of creative killer for people is getting on the internet, checking email, checking social media while you're working. And so if you want to do those things, and we have to do them for business, right? Make sure that you're only focused on making music. And if you can keep your attention on that for 52 minutes and then give yourself a 10-minute break, you will be so much more productive, and you're going to have more perspective too, which is what you said and is so key. Because I don't know about you, but I bet it's the same. And I'm sure for a lot of people listening to this, there have been times where I've been so hyped on something that I've been working on, and I'll get up, I'll go have a meal or something. I'll sit outside, I'll walk our dog for a little bit, and I'll come back and I'll say, oh my gosh, I mean, there is a glaring 700 hertz node on my snare drum. And it was like just screaming in my face, but I was focused on this one little synth part, and I wouldn't have heard it because I was so obsessed. And I could have even just powered it out and finished that piece of music, and there would have been an error in it. So my point is taking these breaks really do give you perspective. Another sort of gift for that, and kind of like I was saying about audio editing and being really sort of pragmatic and cutthroat about it, is I do the same with, I render everything to audio. So I don't live in the kind of MIDI domain ever. The one exception to that would be if I'm doing kind of, sort of deep sample orchestral composing, because I have like a fixed auto load with thousands of instruments in it. So I can do full recalls of that without having audio. And plus, that stuff doesn't really need to be time corrected. I'm not doing a lot of sound design on it. And eventually I do stem it out, but then I'll do interesting things to it in kind of standalone applications. So that is one exception to this. But the reason I bring up rendering things as audio is it indicates an internal commitment, which I think is really important in the music making process, where you say to yourself, this is good. I'm committing that this is going to go in a piece of music. And the interesting sort of polar both and thought is I routinely will throw those things out. So I don't care what you make something on, or if you work on something for 7 hours, if that part at the end of the day isn't right, take it out. Bye. See you later.
To be clear, because you're recording audio, you would literally have to delete and re-record it. We wouldn't be, because you don't have the MIDI. You're not endlessly tweaking a note or agonizing over timing or velocity. You're just like, it's wrong, do it again.
Yeah, no, you just Marie Kondo that mofo. It's like, thank you for, what does she say? It's like, thank you for
what you've done.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything you've done for me. And
exactly. Thank you for teaching me about bandpass filters today, and I'm done with you. Goodbye. So I think it's really easy for us to get attached to things. There's going back to Dr. Boulanger. We did a project. One of my first projects in class with him was a project, and it was this project where we had to prepare an entire composition, and this is floppy disk times, right? So I had a 3.5 floppy disk that I had, my MIDI files for this on, all this stuff written out on, sort of traditional, treble bass clef, sort of staff paper, right? And all my notes and everything. He said, prepare all of this and put it in a single folder, and I want you to come next week and you're going to present to the class. So we worked on it for a month. And I went second, so I knew it was coming. So the person stands, they present, they play their piece of music, and they talk about why they made the creative decisions that they made, and so on and so forth. And then Dr. B says, okay, that's great. All right, pack your little folder up there and put that in the trash can. And the person's like, what? And literally, people cried. I'm not joking either. People actually wept doing this. I call it an experiment, but it was an assignment. And what he was teaching us about, and he never explained it. But I know now, I understand it intimately. What he was teaching us about was attachment. And so we become so attached to there's always this big story. A friend of mine the other day was like, oh yeah, well this part is, it's a SID chip, and that's 6 hours, and I had to print that, and I had to denoise it, and blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, it's not good. You should definitely take that out. And he's like, well, no, but did you hear what I said? Like, I made it with this thing, And I sat on the floor, and then I took it, and I was like, but it's just take it out. It's not serving your composition. The composition is way better with that not in there. And he did. He loved it. So we get attached to our story about how things happened and how much time they took, and our whatever our friend was mad with us that day. We get all this stupid stuff wrapped up in the creative process, when the scientific principle, Occam's razor, you just cut it out. It's a very hard thing to do, because we have, our brains are these kind of story creating machines. But I really do think it serves in the creative process. My mom's a psychiatrist, and there's this principle in psychiatry called cognitive intervention. And it's this idea, sort of self-cognitive intervention. It's this idea that if you can pause for a moment between receiving some kind of stimuli, like somebody's coming at you really angry, right? And so if you're able to pause for a moment instead of act reflexively, then you have a choice, right? And it's a similar kind of thing in a way, in that if you're able to get out of your own way in that way, again, it's this idea of giving a gift to your future self. Underneath all of this is a way bigger thought and idea, which is why. Like, why are we even thinking about these things? Why are we so drawn to organizing these sounds? Like, what is the why, right? And the interesting thing is that's different, and it's unique for everyone. And there are some people that are drawn to music and the culture of music with a why that's not kind of congruent to who they are. And they're never going to be happy making music if those two things aren't reconciled. And so I think the creative process and the creative expression is kind of this fundamental language of communication that doesn't know, it's not adherent to a culture or a sex or a race or a gender or any. It's just completely non-denominational. It knows no language boundaries, and we can share these emotional states through music without speaking the same language. I mean, that alone is just absolutely remarkable. And when I think about why to make music, I think it's really important underneath all of this to have a fundamental understanding of your own personal why, and make sure that that's lined up with something that's congruent with who you are as a person. And without those two things being kind of coterminant or like matched, it creates conflict, and ultimately doesn't make us happy in the creative process. So, there's some better whys than others, but I think that it's an important thing for all of us to be focused on. You should be able to write down, in my humble opinion, you should be able to write down on a piece of paper in 2 sentences why you make music, and remind yourself of that every day. When you show up and it's frustrating, or you show up and you're not getting the result you want, remind yourself why you do this and what you love about it and what you're trying to express and who that's for, and all of those kind of things. I think is sort of fundamental to the creative process.
Yeah, that's and it's also that I think a lot of Eurorack people have to work this out, because it's one of those things where you buy stuff and you're like, what is my purpose? Like, oh yeah, that's actually why I bought all this stuff. It's like,
it's so funny. Yeah, I've had this conversation where literally I've had this conversation with my wife, and Lacey is so smart. Actually, she's helped with the Eurorack a lot. I'm going to give you another one that is hopefully helpful with the Eurorack. So
yeah.
I have an conversation with her. I mean, she went to school for fine art, for photography, right? Like she's an artist, but not musically inclined. However, like incredible ears, but she doesn't play an instrument or sing or anything like that, right? So I'm sitting explaining to her why I need more LFOs and envelopes. And she's like, kind of like half there, like eyes squinted, like, why am I listening to this? Right. And she looked me straight in the eyes and she said, here's how we're going to do this. Okay. Are you ready? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure. You look very serious right now. She's like, it's Hunger Games. We're going to do Hunger Games with the Eurorack. If something else needs to go in, something has to die. And I'm like, whoa. So now my Eurorack it's a static object. It literally, I haven't put something in my Eurorack for the last module I got was probably a year and a half ago or something. Now, the coolest part of that is I've put things, I really spent a lot of time organizing them on Modular Grid PS, which is a little shout out to those guys. It's amazing there.
It's great, isn't it?
And it's so good. And so, really thought it out, like, okay, I don't want to have to stretch tip top stackables halfway across the room to get from this one thing that I commonly patch to the other one. Oh, you made me think of something else too about the Eurorack. I'm going to speak to that in a second. So, but anyway, so it's now a fixed object. It's like an instrument, and I couldn't work it with my eyes shut, but I know where everything is by muscle memory now.
Yeah.
You asked me before something great about the clocks. So what I do in that area is I'm using a couple different things to generate clocks. So actual pulse is generated from that SBX 80 and from some SBX 1s, depending on the division. And then I'm using a mult, and I literally have any module. I wish we were on Zoom. I could show you this. Any module that has clock is patched. I never patch clock ever over there. Now, if I want to subdivide the clock or I want to change the clock, I will unpatch it. I'll take a stackable, put it on the clock cable that was in it, and then go to something divide down or multiply up, whatever, blah, blah. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I can go to that and I never have to patch clock, which is when Richard Devine was here last and he's like, dude, what are these things coming from behind the modules? I was like, I drilled a hole in the back of the Eurorack case, a massive hole, like a inch in diameter hole. And I put this loom in the back, and then I've left little blanking panels. So I can't remember the thickness, but I've drilled a hole in them and I've pulled a cable through, and it's right next to the module, and the clock is patched. So I never patch clock ever in the Eurorack environment. All the step sequencers are ready to rock. The ER101 is my favorite, by the way. And I love the IntelliGel.
That thing scares me, the ER101. I don't know how, it looks too mathematical.
So check it out. Here's what's so cool. Okay. So it's a bit of a cluster cuss, just if you're not used to that idea of doing it by numbers. But don't get me wrong, I like the kind of IntelliGel. What's the one that's modeled after the System 100A?
The Metropolis.
Yeah, exactly. I love that with, kind of the, slider to grab, your voltages, whether it's, duration, if it's patch and envelope, or if it's pitch or whatever you're doing it for, is such a great way to do it. And there's something so much fun about just looping on a note and you change the pitch with the knob. And so you're listening and you can hold on that step, and that step is binging at the clock rate. And you listen, you're like, okay, that one. And then you let off the button, and then you set its duration and you move to the next one. And I'll tell you what, if you get into a rhythm with that, you will find yourself writing some sequences that are so wildly different to something you would write with sliders, and certainly unrelated to something you write in a DAW. It's a lot lower learning curve than you would think, with a lot higher payoff. It's my favorite sequencer in that environment. You just write the weirdest stuff that turns around weird. I'll do ostinatos on that ER101, and I'll do one in 6/4 and another one in 4/4 and one in 7/8. These weird things, kind of, Manuel Goshting, Tangerine Dream.
Oh yeah, E2, E4 vibes.
Oh, dude, the greatest record ever made. I never get to talk about that one. I love that you know that. Some people don't know that record.
Yeah, I've got a CD of it. I've just been rebuying CDs because I gave up Spotify. So I've literally got E2, E4s on its way to me.
I love it, man. It's one of my favorite. It's literally, so funny story about that. I guess I was probably about 18, and it was when Winter Music Conference started. I took a train down there. I stayed in a youth hostel, and there was a group of about 25 of us there. And there were certainly no kind of punters or fans, whatever. It was a small group of people at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami. And one of the people that was there, I mean, Masters at Work, Todd Terry, Carl Craig, one at everybody. Like, I mean, kind of who's who of the early kind of, house and Detroit techno guys, and Kevin Saunderson was there. Masters at Work, I think I mentioned. But anyway, Josh Wink was there, and Josh played in a small club, more like a bar. And I had never heard that record before. And he played it in the middle of like a kind of like a house sort of techno type set.
Oh, wow.
And he played the entire record. And I lost my mind. It was literally like a religious experience. I'm not kidding. I remember it so viscerally. He played the entire thing. And I was like, this is one of the most incredible pieces of music I have ever heard in my entire life. And it really informed for me what is possible, I think, in a lot of ways, insofar as electronic music. And it's like a high I've been chasing since then, that feeling of it's like a place, that record, it feels like
it is.
Not like a piece of music. Island. Yeah, exactly. It's an island. I love that.
You go sit on it.
Oh,
it's a live jam, isn't it? It's a jam.
Yeah,
it was
That's just one of the greatest electronic records, literally in the history of electronic music ever. He's using a box that has eluded me too, and I see them every now and again. I mean, when I say every now and again, I mean every 5-7 years, come up on something like Reverb or eBay. It's kind of somewhere in between a bucket brigade delay and a reverb. It's in that weird kind of no man's land. But a lot of the effect signature of that record is this box. It's any nerds like us listening to this, look that up and then send me the link. It's a multi-tap delay, but that you can make these really primitive reverb type sounds with, but is apparently just absolute epic magic effects box. And I'm on the prowl for
sounds a little bit like the Make Noise Mimeophone, where it's like delay and reverb. I don't know if that comes within your 1.5 years of Eurorack, but maybe it snuck in under the last sort of like,
no,
get into BT's rig before he locks down. Like,
yeah, no, it's not made it. It really, I'm telling you, there's a payoff to it. There really is. Like, I know exactly where my braids is. I know where my Tip Top Audio ZD DSP is. I know I've got a spot for my cards where those live, and I can make patches really quick in that environment because it has stayed, So yeah. So
I've got I had my sort of, it's a stock question, and it's it's a difficult one, but an interesting one, especially for yourself, because you're producing electronic music equipment and tools. It can be seen different ways, like either what you think should change or what you would like to do but you can't.
It's a phenomenal question. So the future of music and creative technology is artificial intelligence, without question. And when you get into this conversation, a lot of people think, sort of Black Mirror, sci-fi, Philip K. Dick type stuff.
Yeah.
Because I work in software development regularly, I mentioned at the beginning of this, working on 11 applications as we speak, and have been doing a tremendous amount of research and development in the AI space over the last 4 years with guided adversarial networks, convolution-based neural networks, recursive neural networks, and have actually amassed a really sizable training base of some things around some applications and ideating around some things that will end up in applications that I'm working on currently. So that is absolutely, without question, the future of, humanity. I will say that anyone that pushes back on this is living in under a rock. And I want this to be controversial and confrontational. And here's why. Because if you have this sort of Luddite mindset that artificial intelligence is not going to be, not just in our daily life in the creative space, but potentially overtake the ability of humans, then you're not going to help sculpt what the future is. And this is why I want this to be aggressively confrontational, because it is up to us as the artist community to sculpt what this means. And if we don't, you're going to see things like Spotify, which is taking, an artist's ability to support themselves, right? And then it translates into 1% of the population, and everyone else, the only people that make money from something like Spotify are 1% of artists. And Daniel Ek and everyone at Spotify knows that. He even speaks to it. And everybody else might make $25 a month, sometimes for millions of listens too. And so if you
surely, is your music on? Your music must be on Spotify.
Absolutely. Can I tell you something funny? I'll tell you something funny about Spotify. I had a conversation with my publisher the other day. This will give you an idea of how well you do from these kind of things. And like I said, we're so lucky. We have other ways that we're able to support ourselves, and so we're very, very lucky in that way. I have a lot of friends that don't. So when in that big jump from iTunes to Spotify, they're gone. They have regular jobs now. And these were A-list electronic music artists. And so I'm not going to call out by any names, but it literally destroyed the livelihoods of many, many people. And artificial intelligence is going to do that 10,000x if we do not curate what that means insofar as the creative community. So I'm waving a big red flag for everybody. It's something that,
Sorry, I was going to say, I've heard, there was a musician who basically, you can algorithmically generate music by you can feed David Bowie's catalog into these things, and it spits out Bowie-like music, and it's that sort of, we're almost having the same kind of discussions that people had when synthesizers and drum machines first came out, where it's your synthesizer is going to replace, you can make a trombone and I won't be able to play the trombone anymore, or drum machines are killing music, But I think, is there not an argument that it's if what Spotify are doing are kind of the way that Spotify works, in that the way it creates playlists for functions, so it's music to chill to, like music to, code to, or music to jog to. It's not put on your headphones, strap in, you're going to hear BT's new record. But I suppose then, therefore, how can we use AI for good? What's the positive application of it?
Okay, so I mean, if you want me to speak to this, so first of all, let's make a linguistic distinction, and it's a very important one. I detest when people say, and I do it, I'm guilty of it myself, so not getting in your face, but when we say the Spotify algorithm, it's artificial intelligence. So Spotify is doing song topography. They're doing audio feature set identification. They have a massive training set, which is basically every piece of recorded music. It is artificial intelligence. Yeah. It's not an algorithm. It's artificial intelligence. That is what I would consider Spotify more of an artificial intelligence company than a music aggregator. So, and they probably internally refer to themselves in a similar way. So I think it's a very important distinction. So secondly, now what you have is an entire generation of people creating music for, it's really kind of a double plus on good sort of Orwellian type thing. People will say, well, for the algorithm, you got to make sure that something really interesting happens in the first 30 seconds. And you're like, hang on a second here. So you're telling me that you're making a piece of music to appease artificial intelligence? Are you hearing yourself? You're making music for computer. And I would argue that it's made people less happy. It's made people feel less connected. It's made people more bored with music. It's made the turnover rate of music higher because people are it's kind of like to use fast food as an example, right? Like if you get a quarter pounder with cheese that has been focus grouped and people wearing dual hemisphere electroencephalographs. So they've gamed the exact right amount of sugar and salt to stimulate the same parts of your brain with Oreos. Let's use Oreos because I happen to know, I read a study about it. Stimulates the same part of your brain that's stimulated when you use cocaine. Okay, so that's how disingenuous the creators of Oreos are. And then what happens after you eat Oreos? Your sugar crashes. Your insulin goes through the floor. It's like a religious experience eating an Oreo, right? You're like on cocaine, okay, and then you crash. It's terrible for you. So the same thing is happening with music. I would argue that it's why people are so hungry for music experience, because their experience of music now is exactly what you said. It's this ephemeral passing experience, and it's in the background. So it's music to chill to. So what does that indicate? You're chilling. You're doing something else. It's music to run to or to work out to. What does that indicate? You're doing something else. Music to study to. Same thing. And so I would say that people are dying for authentic music experiences. Now, to wrap this whole thing up, you said something that is one of the most important things that we need to be thinking about. And it's what the musical community needs to rally around. I privately talk to people about this all the time. I've never talked about this publicly. I'm going to seed this idea here. So, and I've never heard anyone else ever talk about this. Okay. I would argue that an artist is the sum total of their life experience expressed creatively in decisions. So our preferences are expressed creatively as decisions, right? And it would seem really, really complex. Well, this person wrote this really sad piece of music when their father passed away, right? Like, how is that a hierarchical tree of decision making? It is. And I can tell you from looking at the way that particularly convolution-based neural networks analyze these massive data sets of material, they don't need names for variables like we do. They're not thinking like attack transient or timbre or aperiodic or periodic signal. They're just thinking, I see similarities in this data set across tens of thousands, if not 30, 50,000 variables. So an artist is this sum total hierarchical tree of decision making. So what is that actually in the artificial intelligence space? We would call that a training set. I believe that an artist should legally have the right to patent their training set. So when we make this quantum jump, and it's going to happen not inside 15 years, not inside 50 years, inside 10, more like inside 5. When we make this quantum jump from non-generative music and humans making music to generative music, if an artist is not legally protected as a training set, that artist will be cloned in this space, and music like their works will be enjoyed for people, and people in Silicon Valley will decide what that's worth. And I guarantee you, like Daniel Ek paid himself more than the sum total of all royalties in Spotify for almost the entire duration of Spotify, those kind of decisions will be made and they will not benefit the artistic community. So I would say that artists need to rally around this idea that their preference has value. It's kind of like data in, when we talk about data protection and privacy in the internet. Think that, but 50,000x. You've studied your whole life. You've had all of these life experiences, and they are expressed as musical decisions. And those decisions can be quantified. 77% of the time, you might choose a D minor 9 chord after an F sharp major chord. It's just numbers. It's all it is numbers. And all you need is a big enough training set to feed artificial intelligence. And you make a new algorithm out of this training set. And that algorithm is a person. And so eventually these two things will collide. And if artists are not protected that as a training set, there won't be artists anymore.
Damn. Oh my God. I suppose then the question is, how can you protect the sort of style of your music? You get into a thing where you need musicologists and sort of people to say this is a BT riff, but I just don't know how we can police it. I suppose is the fear, and that they'll just sort of subsume people's music without a robust enough legal system, or the legal system will be scrambling to deal with it. A little bit like when sampling kicks off in the late 80s,
Right.
mid to late 80s, and the legal system was just like, what is this? Like, we've never had to deal with this before. And they catch up, but it takes them a few years. And in the meantime, Kraftwerk didn't get, the Winstons get nothing for Amen Brother. And, it's like...
It's exactly right. The laws catch up way later. And it's why I keep waving a red flag. It's funny because the music community has this real strong aversion to artificial intelligence. It's like an uncanny valley sort of thing. And that's a great read. If you don't know what that is, read about it. It's fascinating. It's basically the closer we get to emulating something, the more repulsed we feel by it. And so they will literally push back on this idea that this is ever going to be possible, much less in the immediate future. And I'm literally watching people working on things. I mean, Google Project Magenta, the Google project, it's like it's writing Bach fugues that musicologists can't tell aren't Bach. It's crazy what's happening right now. And so my answer to what your question was there is, we have to rally around this idea, and we need to pass laws. We need to go before, Parliament and Congress. We need to rally around this idea that an artistic preference training set, we need to come up with a good name for it, can be patented and protected, and can be monetized too. So, and the upside to all of this, and kind of the every cloud, just to sort of, kind of nice little circle, is that if we do this, it is going to give artists the ability to clone themselves. And so you can have kind of infinity things making things that you can ultimately curate, but that are to your preference immediately. And this is my interest in artificial intelligence. It's to augment the creative workflow. And I think it's possible, but it's going to take the artistic community being involved in this, believing it's possible, and protecting their data. And until people, I fear that people are going to, that we might see some of the Amen Brothers sort of thing, or what happens with drone technology. No one knows what to do, and the laws catch up kind of too late. So I think that the more people that are thinking about this and involved in it, the better. And it's something I plan on trying to spearhead something with NARIS and about this, because NARIS does speak before American Congress regularly, and have had a lot to do for advocating for streaming royalties. And I spearheaded a project with them about 10, maybe longer than that, about 15 years ago, for Best Electronic Album for Grammy. And everyone laughed at me. They said I was crazy. No one cared about electronic music. And I hired a writer for the LA Times. We did a 50-page prospectus on electronic music, and I pitched it to all those old school engineers that mix like Steely Dan records and thought I was like some crazy kid with a stupid haircut. And finally they acquiesced, and now there's a Best Electronic Album category, which really means something for American musicians. So NARIS is a great organization. And I'm sure that there are equivalencies in England and in other places. But these are things that we need to be thinking about and rallying around to protect the artistic community, or it quite literally will evaporate at a point. So, so we're at a crossroads, and it can be great, or it can be not. And so, it's up to us to decide that.
Wicked.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh man, my pleasure.
Yes, mate. Thank you, BT. And it is BT. I checked. Even his mum calls him BT, he said. So it's definitely BT. What a nice man. And also, I love the use of the term cluster cuss, which I will have to try and use. Reminds me of Fantastic Mr. Fox. Yes, flipping heck. A lot of stuff to unpack there, isn't there? Just thinking about how to manage gear more than anything. That is absolutely on point. The whole thing of separating modular so that it's an idea station, that really, really resonated. And that is how I have found modular to be the most effective. But also, obviously, BT is also using expert sleeper stuff and integrating modular with, with computer too. The idea of having all your clocks set up so you don't have to do all this fiddly stuff. The idea of auto loads where you just clack a switch and all your gear is just ready to go. All the MIDI is plumbed, all the stuff is done. The idea of using days where you don't feel creative to organize your studio. Such an on-point thing to say, and it's absolutely right. If you don't feel like writing music, well, tidy up. Make things ready, do sound design, put together sample libraries of your own, gifts to give yourself in the future that you can use. Such good stuff. That is just gold. And the things that you may have, intuitively you sort of end up doing, I tidy my studio and I feel better, but I wish I thought about it in such a kind of structured, positive way. And structure is also the point. I followed up with, with BT's manager just to sort of ask the question, when he was referring to kind of structure of his days, what did he mean? And I think he literally does compartmentalize his day into sort of activities. And, he was talking about having time made for experimentation, time for exercise, time for other things. And it's actually, weirdly, it's something I've been doing over the last few weeks after speaking to him. We're thinking, independently arriving at the point that it's become essential to kind of schedule our days. This is, me and with a family and a job and, YouTube videos and things that I'm making and podcasts that I have to create. I have to try and find time for these things in the day. Let me tell you, it is not easy, as I'm sure you can imagine. Hence, I am probably one of, I make the least amount of stuff compared to a lot of the YouTubers I know, but that's because it's not my full-time job, and so I have to try and compartmentalize it, and it works, And also, how can you not love a man that has his 90s rig set up in the corner of his studio exactly as it was when he first started making music? That to me is just it's just chef's kiss. That is chef's kiss, is what it is. I mean, wow. And that you would set up rigs in this way and compartmentalizing the music process, accepting that certain gear needs to be separate and just used in its own sort of right and can be used as an idea station and integrated in other ways. There's a sort of sense that it's not always necessary that a studio needs to be fully integrated, in that you learn that it's okay to use certain bits of gear off in their own little setup. Do you know what I mean? As in, it's that thing of, I think it's too tempting to consider wiring absolutely everything that you may own together. And there's something to be celebrated in just using bits of gear individually. It's what I do when I make YouTube videos. It'll just be me and a drum machine and a synth, and I'll do something very stripped. And a lot of the things that I will put into my YouTube videos, quite clearly are things that could have tracks built around them. And I think it's sort of telling that BT's kind of built his studio to a degree in that sort of way, in the sense that he does have areas. He has bits of self-contained gear that he knows work well together, and he goes and gets inspired on those and then pulls the results over into the center of the room where he can organize and chop it up a bit better. And then, of course, also what you said about AI. Flipping heck. This is the sort of question I was asking, is just how can we patent our training sets? But he's absolutely right that if we don't think of a way, people will find ways to take your music and re-engineer it from the ground, reverse engineer your music and understand the decision making that goes down to it. Because I mean, when all's said and done, if we can have YouTube videos that people make, how to make a track like deadmau5, or, how to make a track like BT, then that means that we're able to discern qualities, elements, components, and whatever they may be, from choice of sound to choice of time signature and melodic sort of phrasing, that are unique to a particular person. We're doing it as humans, and we unquestionably are starting to see artificial intelligence, which is able to make, to do things that previously I truly have said, a computer can't paint. You can never get a beautiful artistic painting, but we now know that computers can paint beautifully well and create amazing, inspiring art. Of course, it needs a human to lens it and choose what remains and what to stick on the wall and what to throw in the bin. But the point still stands. If computers can be taught to paint, then it can be taught to make music too. And so I think he's absolutely right. I don't think there is a way that we're not going to come up against issues with musicians' livelihoods, made all more difficult by, trying to make money from the recorded medium, that they will be facing piracy of a whole different level. Piracy, not of the recorded music they have made, but their very talent, their very themness. That is a mind-blowing thing, but it is round the corner because it's, as he says, it's already happening. So, thank you, BT, for chatting to me. Loved it. BT's album, by the way, The Lost Art of Longing, is out now. Obviously, you can stream it, but I would encourage you to buy it. Go and buy his music. He has written some amazing music, and you might be interested to know that BT has written some stuff that I didn't think of as, I didn't even realise that he'd written kind of ambient and sort of, sound is like incredible sort of almost Armand Tobin sort of sound design music. But there's an amazing pair of albums, a double album called Between Here and You and Everything You're Searching For Is on the Other Side of Fear. He literally released 2 albums kind of at once, which is just bananas. Go and listen to those. Like Everything You're Searching For Is on the Other Side of Fear is especially wild expression and creativity using just every piece of, music equipment that you could dream to own, used properly. It's great. Go check it out. Check out the other Why We Bleeps. There are many, many bleeps if you are interested in chats like this. Thank you to our sponsors, that is signalsounds.com for all your gear needs, and Skillshare. It's very good. Go and look at some of the classes and stuff that you can teach yourself. And what I would love is for people to actually go on there and just learn stuff, actually teach yourself new skills. It is truly a win-win. I'm very much believe in it. So check it out. Be well. Take care. Put your mask on. Wash the hands. Keep your distance. But I hope to see you soon. Thanks.